The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind I used to enjoy in the mornings with a cup of tea, but something heavier. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, warning you before something breaks. I was standing in the kitchen, arranging white roses into a glass vase. I'd always preferred roses over lilies. Less dramatic, more honest. My hands moved automatically, trimming stems, adjusting angles, pretending everything in my life was still under control. Then I heard the car. A sharp, expensive engine pulling into the driveway. I didn't need to look to know it was him. My son never came by without a reason anymore, and reasons were rarely good. I glanced through the window, anyway. Daniel stepped out of a sleek black car, checking his reflection in the side mirror. His suit was perfectly tailored, like always. Everything about him screamed success, except the way he avoided looking at the house. A woman stepped out after him, tall, polished, confident. Her heels hit the pavement with purpose. She didn't hesitate. She never did. I didn't recognize her, but I didn't need to. I already knew she mattered.
The doorbell rang. Once.
Then again, impatient. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel before walking to the door. Something in my chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe normally. I had learned long ago that anticipation often hurts more than reality. When I opened the door, Daniel barely met my eyes. "Mom," he said flatly, already stepping inside.
No hug. No worms.
Just business. The woman followed, brushing past me with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mary," she said sweetly.
Too sweetly.
"Nice to finally meet you." Finally. That word lingered longer than it should have. I closed the door behind them and led them into the living room. The same room where Daniel had taken his first steps, where he used to build towers out of books and knock them down laughing. Now he stood there like a stranger, arms crossed, scanning the room like he was evaluating property. "Can I get you something?" I asked. "Yeah, coffee." "This won't take long," he replied. That told me everything. I sat down slowly in my chair, the one my late husband and I had chosen together years ago. It still felt like the safest place in the house. Today, even that felt uncertain. The woman placed a structured leather bag on the table and opened it carefully, like she was unveiling something important. Daniel stayed standing. "The company's been sold," he said.
Just like that.
No build-up.
No hesitation.
The words didn't sink in immediately. They floated in the air, weightless at first, before crashing down all at once. "Sold," I repeated quietly. The woman slid a stack of papers toward me. "The deal closed yesterday," she said, her voice calm, professional. It was the right time. I stared at the documents, but the words blurred together. The company. My company. The one I built from nothing. The one my husband and I spent decades growing, sacrificing for, protecting.
Gone.
"You can't be serious," I said, looking up at Daniel. "I still own it." He laughed. Not kindly. "Mom, you haven't run anything in years," he said. "You don't even understand how things work anymore." That hurt more than the news itself. "I understand enough," I replied, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. The woman leaned forward slightly. "You've been overwhelmed," she said gently. "We've noticed. The missed calls, the confusion, the difficulty managing things." Heat rose to my face.
Confusion? No.
Loneliness. There's a difference. Daniel finally sat down across from me, leaning forward like he was explaining something to a child. "You're not the same since Dad passed," he said. "And that's okay. But the business needs someone who can actually handle it." I clenched my hands in my lap. "The business is doing fine," I said. The reports reflect old strategies," he cut in. "Things are changing.
Fast.
You can't keep up." The woman nodded in agreement, her expression full of false sympathy. We're trying to help you, she added. The sale price was very generous. How much?
I asked.
Daniel hesitated for a second, then answered. 3 million. It was a good number, objectively, but it meant nothing.
Because no one had asked me.
You sold it without my permission, I said. I'm asking now, he replied coldly. Sign the papers. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. The woman smiled again, softer this time. Think about it, Mary, she said. No more stress. No more responsibility. You can finally relax. Relax. After a lifetime of building something that mattered, Daniel stood up and walked toward the window, then turned back to me. The truth is, he said, you've become a burden. The word hit harder than anything else. A burden. I felt something shift inside me, not break.
Shift.
Like something frozen beginning to crack. I did what was necessary, he continued, for the business, and for you. For me, I repeated quietly.
Yes.
You can't afford to maintain this house anyway. You'll need to downsize. I looked at him for a long moment, at the man I had raised, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. You're my son, I said softly. And I'm trying to fix your mistakes, he replied. Silence filled the room again, but this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt clear.
Calm.
Almost sharp. I stood up slowly. Where do I sign? I asked. Both of them froze. They hadn't expected that. The woman quickly pointed to several places on the documents, fumbling slightly. Here and initial there. I signed everything. My hand didn't shake. Not once. When I finished, I placed the pen down carefully and walked toward the door. That's it, Daniel asked. You're not going to argue? I turned back, resting my hand on the doorknob. Would it change anything? I asked. He didn't answer. I didn't think so, I said. I opened the door. Have a good trip, I added.
They exchanged a glance.
What trip? The woman asked. I smiled faintly. I know more than you think. After they left, the house felt different. Not empty. Not broken. Just waiting. I sat back down in my chair and looked around the room. Everything was exactly the same, but nothing was. After a few minutes, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. Hello? James, I said calmly. It's Mary. There was a pause. Then, I was wondering when you'd call. I smiled slightly. It's time, I said. Everything is in motion. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, but because my mind was too clear, too awake, as if something inside me had finally been switched back on after years of dimming itself to make others comfortable. By the time the sun started rising, I was already sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching the light slowly fill the room, thinking about how strange it was that losing everything could feel so much like taking something back. When James arrived, he didn't bother knocking. He still had his key after all these years. He stepped inside carrying his usual worn briefcase, looking exactly the same as he had a decade ago, calm, observant, and impossible to surprise. So, he said, setting the case down and studying my face carefully, they finally did it. I nodded and gestured toward the table. Exactly as expected. He sat down across from me, folding his hands. And how are you feeling? I considered the question for a moment, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to be honest. Relieved, I said finally, more than anything else. That seemed to satisfy him. He gave a small nod, as if confirming a theory he'd had for years. Good, he replied. That means you're ready. We didn't need to go over the details, not really. We both knew them by heart. We had spent years preparing for this exact moment, quietly, carefully, without rushing. Still, there was something grounding about saying it out loud, about revisiting the foundation of everything Daniel believed he had taken from me. Do you remember? I began, leaning back in my chair. How it all started? James smiled faintly. You and your husband in that tiny office with the broken air conditioner? I laughed softly. It wasn't broken. It just worked when it felt like it. The memory came back vividly. The heat, the uncertainty, the stubborn determination that had carried us through those early years. Everyone thought he was the one running things, I said. He was charming, confident, good with people. Investors loved him. And you let them believe it, James added. I needed them to, I replied. Back then it was easier, simpler. People trusted a man with a vision more than a woman with a plan. I paused, running my fingers along the edge of my cup. So, I let him be the face of it all. Meanwhile, I built everything underneath. That was the part no one ever understood. Not even Daniel. Especially not Daniel. He had grown up watching the surface, the meetings, the deals, the public success. He saw his father shaking hands, signing contracts, making speeches. What he didn't see were the late nights, the calculations, the strategies, the risks I managed quietly behind the scenes. He didn't see how every major decision passed through me first, how every structure we built was designed not just for growth, but for protection. The company was never just the company, I continued. It was layers. Always layers. James opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, placing it gently on the table between us. And those layers are still intact, he said. I nodded. Of course they are. I stood up and walked to the cabinet, taking out a set of documents Daniel had never even known existed. I placed them beside James's folder and opened them slowly, almost ceremonially. When Daniel joined the business, I said, we already knew we needed to prepare for the future. His father's health wasn't what it used to be. James adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages. That's when you created the structure. Not just created, I corrected. Secured. I leaned slightly forward, my voice steady. Most of the real value, the patents, the international agreements, the properties, was moved into separate entities. Legal, clean, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them specifically. James looked up at me, and Daniel never looked. I smiled faintly.
He saw what he wanted to see.
He assumed what he wanted to assume. That was always his weakness. There had been a moment, one very specific moment, when everything became clear to me. I remembered it perfectly. It was late afternoon, the light coming through the office windows just right, quiet enough to hear voices from down the hall. Daniel had been on the phone. I hadn't meant to listen, but I stopped when I heard my name. He said I had no idea what I was doing. I told James now that I was just holding things together out of habit, that I didn't understand the business anymore. James shook his head slowly. And that's when you decided to move forward. That's when I realized, I said, that my son didn't know me at all. That hurt more than anything Daniel said yesterday. Not the insult, not the word burden, but the certainty behind it. He truly believed it. And belief like that doesn't come from nowhere. It builds over time, fed by assumptions, reinforced by silence. I had been silent for too long. James closed the folder and leaned back.
So now we wait, he said.
Yes, I replied, returning to my seat. Now we wait. Because I knew exactly what would happen next. Daniel would go where he always went when he felt powerful, forward, without hesitation, without doubt. He would celebrate, spend, plan a future based on numbers he didn't fully understand. And then, at some point, reality would catch up with him. Where are they now? James asked. I glanced at my phone. On a plane, I said. Heading to Europe. He raised an eyebrow. Celebrating already? Of course, I replied calmly. Why wouldn't they? As far as they know, they've just secured their future. I allowed myself a small pause before adding, using money that doesn't belong to them. James didn't laugh, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his expression. You're certain everything is in place? He asked. I met his gaze directly. Every account, every transfer, every clause. There's nothing for them to access. I wasn't guessing. I knew, because I had made sure of it myself. Years of planning, years of patience, all leading to this exact moment. I didn't rush it. I didn't act out of anger. I waited until the situation revealed itself completely. And now it had. Then it won't take long, James said. No, I agreed softly. It won't. After he left, the house felt quiet again, but not in the same way as before. This time, the silence felt purposeful, like everything was exactly where it needed to be. I spent the rest of the day going through reports, answering emails, reviewing documents that actually mattered, the real business, the one Daniel had never touched. It was strange how natural it felt, like stepping back into a role I had never truly left. Every decision, every number, every detail made sense to me. It always had. That evening, I walked through the house slowly, stopping in places filled with memories. The hallway where Daniel used to run as a child. The living room where we celebrated birthdays and small victories. For a moment, I let myself feel it, the weight of everything that had changed, everything that had been said. But I didn't dwell on it, because the truth was simple. I hadn't lost my son yesterday. I had lost him long before that. Yesterday was just the moment I stopped pretending otherwise. When I finally went to bed, I placed my phone on the nightstand and turned off the light. I knew it would ring the next day. Not once, not twice, many times. And when it did, everything would begin to unfold exactly as it was meant to. I closed my eyes, not with worry, but with certainty. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was in control. The first call came earlier than I expected. I was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the soft gray light of early morning settle over the garden. There's something about that hour, the world quiet, suspended between night and day, that makes everything feel sharper, more honest. My phone vibrated against the table, breaking the stillness. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. For a moment, I just watched it ring. Not out of hesitation, but out of curiosity. I wanted to know how long he would wait before panic replaced confidence. I didn't answer. The call stopped. Then came another. And another. By the fourth call, I picked it up. Good morning, Daniel, I said calmly. Mom. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear it already, something underneath, something unstable. There's a problem. I took a slow sip of tea before responding. What kind of problem? The accounts, he said quickly. There's some kind of issue with the transfer. The money isn't there. I let a small pause stretch between us. That's strange. I called the bank, he continued, his words coming faster now. They said the account was closed yesterday. Closed, Mom. That doesn't just happen. No, I said quietly. It usually doesn't. In the background, I could hear a woman's voice, sharp, impatient. So she was still there.
Of course she was. For now.
Tell her to fix it. The voice snapped faintly through the phone. Daniel lowered his voice. Mom, I need you to call James. There's obviously been a mistake. I looked out the window, watching the first rays of sunlight touch the tops of the trees. It's very early here, I said. I'm sure whatever it is can wait a few hours. No, it can't wait, he snapped, the controls slipping. We're not at home, Mom. We have bookings, reservations. Our cards aren't working either. I could almost picture it. The polished hotel lobby, the confusion, the first signs of embarrassment creeping in as reality didn't match expectation. That does sound inconvenient, I said evenly. There was a long silence. Then his voice came back, lower now, sharper.
Mom.
I'm going to ask you one more time. Call James. Now. I set my cup down carefully. Why would I do that? For the money, he said, as if it were obvious. The $3 million from the sale. It should be in my account. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Your account? Yes, my account, he said impatiently. The one connected to the company. I allowed myself a small breath before answering. Daniel, that money is exactly where it's supposed to be. Relief flooded his voice instantly. Thank God. So just call and... It's in my account, I finished. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard his breathing, uneven now, no longer controlled. What did you just say? He asked quietly. I said the money is in my account, I repeated. Where it has always been. The reaction was immediate. That's not possible, he snapped. I sold the company. I have the documents. You signed them. Yes, I said calmly. You sold part of the company. And I did sign. Part. His voice cracked slightly. What do you mean part? I stood up and walked slowly toward the window, watching the sunlight spread across the garden. You sold what you owned, Daniel. The operational structure. The visible side of the business. And the rest, he demanded. The rest was never yours to sell. I could hear movement on his end, voices, confusion building into something louder. Messier. That doesn't make any sense, he said. The company was Dad's. It became mine. The name did, I corrected. The day-to-day operations did. But the core assets, the patents, the international agreements, the properties, those were never part of what you inherited. Another pause. This one longer.
He was thinking now.
Finally. You're lying, he said, but there was hesitation in it.
No, irraplia shufli.
You just never ask the right questions. The woman's voice cut in, louder this time. Let me talk to her. There was a brief struggle, then a new tone on the line. Sharp, controlled, but strained. Mary, she said. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Is there? I asked. You can't just claim ownership of assets like that, she continued. We've seen the documents. You've seen some documents, I corrected. Not all of them. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to piece things together. The legal structure, she started, is very thorough, I interrupted calmly. It took years to build. Years you weren't there for.
Silence again.
This time, heavier. When Daniel came back on the line, his voice had changed. The confidence was gone. Something else had taken its place. Something closer to fear. You knew, he said slowly. Yes, I replied. For how long? I didn't hesitate. Long enough. He let out a sharp breath. You planned this. I prepared for it, I said. There's a difference. You set me up, he snapped. You let me believe. I let you believe what you chose to believe, I interrupted. You never once sat down with me and asked how things actually worked. You assumed. I trusted you, he said. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. No, Daniel. You trusted that I didn't know any better. That's not the same thing. That hit. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Behind him, the sounds of the hotel were getting louder. Voices, movement, the subtle chaos of a situation unraveling in public. Mom, he said finally, and for the first time, there was something almost human in his voice. We're stuck here. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not anger. Not arrogance. Reality. I imagine you are, I said. Our cards aren't working, he continued. The hotel is asking questions. We can't stay here without payment. I see. "Can you help us?" he asked. The question hung between us. For just a second I felt it, that familiar pull, the instinct to fix things, to protect him, to step in the way I always had. But then I remembered his voice. "You're a burden." And something inside me settled. "You'll have to figure it out," I said. "What?" he whispered. "You wanted independence," I continued calmly. "Now you have it. You can't just leave us here," he said, panic rising again. "I'm not leaving you," I replied. "I'm letting you experience the consequences of your decisions." "That's not fair," he said. I almost smiled. "Neither was selling my life's work without asking me," I said. Silence again. Longer this time. "What do we do?" he asked finally. And there it was. The real question. Not about money. Not about control. About responsibility. "That," I said, "is something you'll have to figure out on your own." I ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, I just stood there holding the phone, listening to the quiet of the house. Then I set it down and poured myself another cup of tea. Outside, the sun had fully risen now, casting everything in warm light. A new day, a new beginning. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I didn't answer. By midday, I had stopped counting the calls. At some point, they all began to sound the same. Desperation layered over anger, frustration tangled with disbelief. I let most of them ring out. Not because I was being cruel, but because there was nothing left to say over the phone that would change anything. Some lessons require distance, discomfort, and time. I spent the morning in the garden, trimming branches that had grown wild over the past months, restoring shape where neglect had taken over. It felt appropriate somehow. Life, like people, tends to lose its structure when left unchecked. When the call finally came that I decided to answer, the tone had shifted. There was no anger left in Daniel's voice, no sharp edge, no arrogance. Just exhaustion. "We're coming back," he said. I paused, lowering the pruning shears slowly. "That was quick." "I called someone," he replied. "We managed to get tickets." I could guess who. There were only a few people left who would still help him without asking too many questions. "I see," I said. "And what happens when you get here?" There was a slight hesitation. "We talk. Properly." "Properly," I repeated. "That's new." He ignored that. "Will you be home?" "This is my home," I said calmly. "Where else would I be?" The line went quiet for a moment, then he added, more carefully this time, "I'm not letting this go. I'm going to fix it." I sat down on the garden bench, feeling the sun warm against my face. "You're welcome to try." "You think I can't?" he challenged weakly. "I think," I said slowly, "that you still don't understand what you're dealing with." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he said, "We'll be there tonight." After the call ended, I stayed in the garden a little longer, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. There is something peaceful about the quiet before confrontation, a kind of clarity that disappears the moment words are spoken. I knew exactly how this would unfold. Not every detail, of course, but the shape of it, the emotional rhythm. Denial, anger, accusation, and then, if I was lucky, understanding. The house felt different that evening. Not tense, not uneasy, just ready. I moved through it slowly, making small adjustments, straightening things that didn't need straightening. Old habits. Preparation had always been my way of grounding myself. When the knock finally came, I didn't rush. I finished what I was doing, washed my hands, and walked to the door at my own pace. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize them. Daniel looked like he hadn't slept. His clothes were wrinkled, his posture tense, his eyes darting slightly, as if he was trying to calculate something he could no longer control. The woman beside him, elegant just days ago, looked worn down, her confidence cracked, replaced by something far less composed. "Mom," he said, his voice measured. Come in, I replied simply. They stepped inside, and I led them to the living room. The same chairs, the same space where everything had started just days ago. But the balance had shifted completely. Daniel no longer stood like he owned the place. Now he hovered, uncertain, choosing a seat instead of taking space. The woman stayed close to him, though not as confidently as before. I've contacted a lawyer, Daniel said as soon as we sat down. We're going to challenge everything. That's your right, I said calmly. He blinked, clearly expecting resistance. You don't seem concerned. I'm not, I replied. The woman leaned forward, her patience thinning. You've taken something that doesn't belong to you, she said. You can't just manipulate legal structures to cut him out. I tilted my head slightly. That depends on whether it was ever his to begin with. Daniel exhaled sharply. Enough of this. Just tell me what you want. That question lingered in the air longer than anything else he had said. What did I want? Not money, not control, not revenge. I want you to understand, I said. Understand what? He snapped. Everything, I replied quietly. I reached to the side table and picked up a folder I had prepared earlier. I placed it on the coffee table and opened it slowly, revealing documents he had never seen before. This, I said, sliding the first paper toward him, is your father's will. I've seen it, he said quickly.
No, y correcta.
You've seen part of it. He frowned but took the document anyway, scanning it with growing tension. This is the original structure. I continued. What you inherited. The company as it appeared. And, he asked. And this, I said, placing another document beside it, is the amendment. He froze. The woman leaned in closer, reading over his shoulder. This isn't possible, she said under her breath. It is, I replied. And it's legally binding. Daniel's eyes moved rapidly across the page, his breathing uneven now. This says the core assets were separated. Yes. When? He demanded. Long before your father passed. He looked up at me, something breaking behind his expression. Why didn't you tell me? I held his gaze steadily. You never asked. That's not, he started, but stopped himself. Because it was true. I let the silence stretch, giving him time to process, to feel the weight of his assumptions collapsing. You let me believe, he said slowly. I let you show me what you believed. I corrected. The woman stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps. This is manipulation, she said. You set him up. No, I said calmly. I protected what I built. Daniel stood as well now, running a hand through his hair. You watched me plan my future around this, he said. You watched me make decisions, big decisions, based on what I thought I had. Yes, I said. And you said nothing. Yes. Why? He demanded. That question mattered. I took a breath before answering. Because I needed to know who you were when you thought I was weak. That hit harder than anything else.
He didn't speak.
Neither did she. The room felt smaller again, but not in the same suffocating way as before. This time, it felt focused, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away. You called me a burden, I said quietly. His eyes closed briefly. I didn't mean. You did, I interrupted gently. And that's what matters. The woman looked between us, her confidence now completely gone. We made plans, she said, her voice sharper, almost defensive. We bought a house. I left my job. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That was a bold decision. You've ruined everything, she snapped. I shook my head slowly.
No.
You built everything on assumptions. That's not the same thing. Daniel sank back into his seat, his energy drained. So what now? He asked. Finally. The right question. Now, I said, you decide what kind of person you want to be. He looked up at me, confused. You can fight this, I continued. You can spend years chasing something that was never yours. Or, I paused, letting the alternative settle. You can start over. Start over, he repeated. Yes. With nothing? He asked bitterly. I met his gaze, calm and steady. Not nothing. Just not what you expected. The woman let out a sharp laugh. This is insane, she said. We're not starting over from nothing. I looked at her, really looked this time. Then you should ask yourself why you were here in the first place. She didn't answer, because she already knew. Daniel stood again, this time slower. I need time, he said. Take it, I replied. He hesitated, as if expecting me to say more, to soften, to offer something. I didn't, because this part wasn't mine anymore. It was his. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. She followed quickly, her heels echoing sharply against the floor. When the door closed behind them, the house fell silent again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt resolved. I walked back to the living room and sat down, letting the quiet settle around me. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to prove. Only something left to see, what he would do next. The house was quiet again after they left, but this time it wasn't the kind of silence that lingers after conflict. It was the kind that follows a decision. Something had shifted, not just in Daniel, but in me as well. For years, I had been reacting, adjusting, softening, stepping back to make space for him, for his assumptions, for his version of reality. Now, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for his next move with anxiety. I was simply waiting. It didn't take long. The call came later that evening. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen when my phone lit up again with his name. I looked at it for a moment before answering, already sensing that this conversation would be different. Mom, he said, and there was no sharpness left in his voice now.
No anger.
Just something quieter. I need help. I didn't respond immediately, not to make him uncomfortable, but because I wanted him to hear what he had just said. Those words didn't come easily to him. What kind of help? I asked finally. There was a pause, longer this time. I don't have anywhere to go tonight. I leaned against the counter, letting that settle between us. Just days ago, he had been planning a future built on millions. Now he was asking for a place to sleep. The spare room is still here, I said calmly. Relief flooded his voice. Thank you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. There are conditions, I added before he could say anything else. The silence returned, cautious now. What kind of conditions? He asked. The same ones anyone else would have, I said. If you stay here, you pay rent. $50 a night. You help around the house. You follow my rules. He exhaled slowly. Mom, I don't have $50. I didn't soften. Then you'll need to find a way to earn it. You're serious? He asked, almost incredulous. Yes. There was a long pause. I could hear him thinking, calculating, adjusting his expectations in real time. Okay, he said finally. I'll figure it out. When he arrived, he didn't knock the way he used to. Not impatient, not demanding. Just a single, quiet knock. When I opened the door, he stood there with a small suitcase, nothing like the polished version of himself from before. No suit, no confidence, no illusion of control. Just a man who had lost something he didn't fully understand until it was gone. Come in, I said. He stepped inside slowly, looking around the house as if seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. We didn't talk much that night. I showed him the spare room, explained the basics, and left him to settle in. There was no dramatic conversation, no emotional confrontation. That would come later if it needed to. Right now, he needed something simpler. Reality. The first few days were awkward. Not tense, just unfamiliar. Daniel wasn't used to this version of life. He wasn't used to waking up without a clear sense of control, without money solving problems before they fully formed. He wasn't used to doing small, ordinary things, cleaning, fixing, helping, without expecting recognition for them. But he tried. That was the difference. At first, it was inconsistent. He would forget things, hesitate, occasionally slip back into old habits. But each time, he corrected himself a little faster. Each day, something shifted, even if only slightly. One morning, I found him in the kitchen before me, making coffee. Not perfectly, he had used too much and it was stronger than it needed to be, but the effort was there. I figured I'd start early, he said, almost unsure. I nodded. That's a good habit to build. He didn't smile, but something in his posture relaxed. Over time, the conversations began to change. Less about what had happened, more about what could happen next. He started asking questions, real questions this time. Not about money, not about control, but about how things worked, how decisions were made, why certain choices mattered more than others. At first, I answered carefully, watching him, measuring whether he was listening or just waiting for his turn to speak. He was listening. That mattered. After about 2 weeks, he came to me one evening with a notebook in his hand. It was filled with notes, ideas, questions, observations. Not polished, not perfect, but thoughtful. I've been thinking, he said. If I wanted to start over properly, where would I begin? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. At the bottom, I said. He nodded slowly. That makes sense. And just like that, something important happened. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. He accepted it. The following weeks were not easy for him. Starting from nothing rarely is. He had to take small jobs, temporary work, things he would have dismissed before without a second thought. It humbled him in ways I couldn't have taught him directly. But it also grounded him. Every dollar he earned mattered. Every task he completed had weight. Every decision required thought. And slowly, very slowly, I began to see the person he could become. Not the version he had tried to be before, confident without substance, but something more real, more steady. Someone who understood that success wasn't something you stepped into, but something you built. One evening, after a long day, we sat in the living room together. No tension, no pressure. Just quiet. I was wrong, he said suddenly. I didn't interrupt. I thought I understood everything, he continued. I thought I was ready, but I didn't even know what I didn't know. That was the closest he had come to saying it out loud. I see that now, he added. I nodded slightly. That's where learning begins. He looked at me, really looked this time, not as someone he needed to manage or outgrow, but as someone he was finally starting to understand. Why didn't you stop me earlier? He asked. I thought about that for a moment. Because you wouldn't have listened, I said. You had to see it for yourself. He accepted that.
No argument.
No resistance. Just quiet understanding. And in that moment, I realized something important. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this house demanding control. And I wasn't the same person who had let him. We had both changed. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough. That night, as I turned off the lights and walked through the house, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Not victory. Something better.
Peace.
6 months changed everything. Not in the dramatic, overnight way people like to imagine, but slowly, quietly, through small choices repeated day after day. Change like that doesn't announce itself. It builds in the background until one morning you look up and realize nothing feels the same anymore. I noticed it first in the house. It felt alive again. Not just clean or organized, but lived in with intention. The small things had shifted. Windows that actually shone because someone had taken the time to clean them properly, the garden no longer overgrown but carefully maintained, The kitchen used not out of habit, but with purpose. Daniel had taken responsibility for those things without being asked. At first because he had to, later because he understood why it mattered. That was the difference. He wasn't just doing tasks anymore. He was paying attention. That morning started like most others had recently. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his footsteps coming down the hallway. Steady, unhurried. Not the restless pacing I remembered from before, not the impatient rhythm of someone always chasing something bigger. Just grounded. "Morning," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Good morning," I replied, handing him a cup before he even asked. He took it with a small nod, already used to the simplicity of it. No expensive machines, no unnecessary extras.
Just coffee.
"Big day?" I asked. He leaned against the counter slightly, thinking. "Potentially," he said. "The Henderson meeting." I watched him carefully for a moment. 6 months ago, he would have talked about that meeting differently. Numbers first, outcomes second, people not at all. Now, his focus had shifted. "What's your approach?" I asked. "They're cautious," he said. "They've had bad partnerships before. So pushing too hard won't work. I think it's better to let them lead the conversation. Show them we're stable, not desperate." I allowed myself a small smile. "That's a good read." He nodded, but didn't look overly proud of himself. That was new too. He had learned that understanding something wasn't something to perform, it was something to use. We sat down at the table, going over details, discussing possibilities, refining strategy. It felt natural. Not like I was teaching him, and not like he was trying to prove anything. Just two people working toward the same goal. At one point, he paused, looking at his notes. "I used to think this part was easy," he admitted. "The decisions, the deals. I thought it was just about confidence." "And now?" I asked. He exhaled slightly. "Now I realize it's mostly about responsibility." That answer told me more than anything else could have. The meeting went well. Not perfectly, but honestly, and that mattered more. When we returned home later that afternoon, there was a quiet sense of progress, not excitement, not celebration, just steady forward movement. That was how real success felt. Not loud, not dramatic, earned. As we settled back into the house, I noticed something else had changed in him. He wasn't just learning the business. He was rebuilding himself. He took accountability now, not just when it was convenient, but consistently. When he made a mistake, he didn't deflect it or justify it. He corrected it. When something didn't go his way, he didn't blame the situation. He adjusted. Those weren't things I could have taught him directly. He had to experience them. That evening, we sat in the living room, the same place where everything had unraveled months ago. But now, the space felt different. Not tense. Not symbolic of conflict. Just neutral. Peaceful. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "When you set everything up," he began carefully, "when you protected the company, did you think it would end like this?" I considered the question seriously. "I hoped it might," I said. "But I didn't expect it." "What would you have done if I hadn't come back?" he asked. There was no hesitation in my answer. "I would have continued," I said. "With or without you." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Come back, I mean." "I know," I said. "I thought about fighting you," he continued. "Legally. Trying to take everything back." "And why didn't you?" I asked. He gave a small, humorless smile. "Because deep down, I think I knew I hadn't earned any of it." That was the moment. Not when he lost everything. Not when he came back. But when he understood why. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked this time not at who he had been but who he was becoming. "I know," I replied. And I did. Because apologies don't mean much without change. And he had changed. Not perfectly. Not completely, but genuinely. A few days later, something unexpected happened. My phone rang, and when I saw the name, I almost didn't answer. But I did. Hello,